54% Canadians want that federal government should cut spending instead of hiking capital gain taxes.
I think this poll should be a wake-up call for the Trudeau government and his Liberals that Canadians are sick and tired of his tax hikes and want his government to cut spending instead.
Digital services tax is almost there. How does it impact the taxpayers and the economy of the country?
The people who end up paying a digital services tax is barely these companies, because this tax gets passed on to consumers, right, in the form of higher prices. Australia brought in a similar tax. It was a 10% tax. And guess what? Netflix just increased prices by about 10%.
We are already having more unemployment, less jobs, more spending, less saving. So what is happening?
In fact, this year, the Trudeau government will have officially doubled the entire national debt. Okay? And this ballooning debt has led to ballooning tax increases. This year alone, from the federal government, from the Trudeau government, we got a carbon tax increase. We got payroll tax increases. We got a capital gains tax increase. We have a new streaming tax here now. We have a digital service tax that the government brought in.
Franco Terrazzano ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਸ਼ਾਮਲ ਹੋ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਜੀ। Franco ਵੈਰੀ ਇੰਟਰਸਟਿੰਗ ਨੇਮ। ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਜਦੋਂ ਸ਼ਾਮਲ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਬਹੁਤ ਕੁਝ ਹੀ ਸ਼ੈਡਸ ਲਾਈਟ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਓਵਰ ਸਪੈਂਡਿੰਗ ਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਟੈਕਸ ਪੇਅਰਸ ਦੀ ਮਨੀ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਬੁਰੀ ਹਾਲਤ ਕੀਤੀ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਹੈ ਸਾਡੀਆਂ ਸਰਕਾਰਾਂ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਡਿਫਰੈਂਟ ਲੈਵਲ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ। ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਫਰੈਂਕੋ ਟੈਰਾਜ਼ਾਨੋ ਡਾਇਰੈਕਟਰ ਨੇ, ਫੈਡਰਲ ਡਾਇਰੈਕਟਰ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਟੈਕਸ ਪੇਅਰਸ ਫੈਡਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ। ਮੇਰੇ ਨਾਲ ਉਹ ਟੈਲੀਫੋਨ ਲਾਈਨ ਤੇ ਇਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਸ਼ਾਮਲ ਨੇ। ਫਰੈਂਕੋ, ਵੈਰੀ ਗੁੱਡ ਮਾਰਨਿੰਗ, ਵੈਲਕਮ ਸਰ।
Hey, Rishi, how are you?
You are very smiling, very laughing today. What's special today?
Anytime I get to chat with you and your audience is a good time, Rishi. I'm happy to be on the show.
That's right. Thank you, Franco. So there is a poll that shows that 54% Canadians want that federal government should cut spending instead of hiking capital gain taxes.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it, right? The majority of Canadians would prefer the government to cut its spending instead of hiking capital gains taxes. So we commissioned Leger, a very good national polling firm, to do this poll for us and to see if Canadians want the government to cut spending or raise taxes. And 54% want the government to cut spending. Only 23% prefer the capital gains tax increase. So Rishi, by a very wide margin of more than 2-1, Canadians want the government to cut spending instead of raising the capital gains tax. And you know what? Out of all the demographics that the polling firm looked into, more than a majority of Canadians want the government to cut spending. And it even gets worse than that for the government. Because if you remove the undecideds, well, then 70% of Canadians want the government to cut spending instead of raising the capital gains tax. So, Rishi, I think this poll should be a wake-up call for the Trudeau government and his Liberals that Canadians are sick and tired of his tax hikes and want his government to cut spending instead.
Mm-hmm. And CBC is showing green light for the bonuses now again.
Yeah, again, it just happened. CBC just approved another batch of bonuses for 1,200 of their non-unionized staff, for their managers, and for their executives. And remember, folks, the CBC takes more than $1 billion from taxpayers every single year. So you're going to be paying for this fresh round of bonuses for those CBC managers and executives. And, you know, this comes off the heels of the CBC last year handing out $15 million in taxpayer-funded bonuses. The bonuses at the CBC have cost taxpayers $114 million since 2015. So it's so crazy that taxpayers are struggling right now in their day-to-day lives. And at the CBC, the gravy train is full steam ahead as they approve more bonuses for more of their employees.
Wow. So now digital services tax is almost there. So how does it impact the taxpayers and the economy of the country?
Yeah, so the federal government is raising another tax. They just brought in what is called a digital services tax, right? And that's a tax applied on companies like Amazon, like Google, like Facebook, like Uber, like Airbnb. But here's the thing. The people who end up paying a digital services tax is barely these companies, because this tax gets passed on to consumers, right, in the form of higher prices. And, France once imposed this type of tax, and guess what? Prices went up. Right? The tax was barely paid by the companies. The people who ended up paying the tax were the consumers, were the small businesses that use services like Amazon. So these types of taxes are barely borne by these large companies. The people who end up paying these taxes are you, me, and the small businesses that rely on them. And Rishi, let me just give you one more example. Australia brought in a similar tax. It was a 10% tax. And guess what? Netflix just increased prices by about 10%.
Oh, wow. So how does it impact our economy then? So it's in form of inflation?
Yes. So there's two ways that a digital services tax impacts the economy. Well, maybe three ways, okay? So number one is inflation, higher prices, right? Because these companies that get the tax put on them then increase prices that consumers face. So number one, the digital services tax will make life in Canada more expensive. Number two, it could encourage the United States to retaliate against this Canadian tax, because this tax will largely be applied on other companies that reside in the U.S. So you've already seen the U.S. threaten tariff retaliation. Okay, well, that hurts the Canadian economy. That hurts many Canadian businesses that rely on selling their goods and services into the U.S. But number three, it broadly hurts the investment environment in Canada. And the reason I say that is because you have many companies around the world that are looking for different places to invest their money and in different jurisdictions. Well, if Canada keeps raising these taxes, there's going to be a lot of global companies that decide just to not set up shop here in Canada.
Mm-hmm. And Franco, also, there is another bill that is online harms bill. So will you please let us know a little bit about that too?
Yeah, well, the government has brought in this online harms bill, okay, in Ottawa. Now, the government is trying to sell Canadians on this bill. The government claims that this is about going after, legitimate harassment online and other types of criminal activity online. However, this bill is much more of a censorship bill, okay? And the parliamentary budget officer, they show that this online harms bill will cost taxpayers more than $200 million because the Trudeau government will have to add more than 300 new censorship bureaucrats to snoop around about what you say and see online. So, if this was just about going after criminals, then why isn't the government hiring police officers, right? Instead, the government is hiring hundreds of bureaucrats that you have to pay for, hundreds of censorship bureaucrats, to snoop around on what you say and see online.
Mm-hmm. So, what is happening? How do you think we are already having more unemployment, less jobs, more spending, less savings? So, what is happening?
Well, the problem is that Canadians are paying the high costs of government right now, right? The federal government continues to balloon out of control. The debt is going out of control. In fact, this year, the Trudeau government will have officially doubled the entire national debt. So think of the 100-plus years of government in Canada, the government of Canada. They've added up about $600 billion worth of debt before Trudeau got into office. Now, in less than a decade, Trudeau has added another $600 billion to the debt on top of that. So the Trudeau government this year will have officially doubled the entire federal government debt, okay? And this ballooning debt has led to ballooning tax increases. This year alone, from the federal government, from the Trudeau government, we got a carbon tax increase. We got payroll tax increases. We got a capital gains tax increase. We have a new streaming tax here now. We have a digital service tax that the government brought in. Okay, so the government is making life more expensive for Canadians, taking more money out of Canadians' pockets, and chasing away jobs and investment. And that is a big reason that many Canadians feel that the economy is not working for them.
And when people know this, what should they do?
Well, a couple things. Number one, email your member of parliament, okay? Especially, right? You can email if you have a Conservative member of parliament, tell them that, you know, you expect them, if they get into government, that they're going to cut spending and cut taxes. If you have a Liberal member of parliament, and I do know that there is a Liberal in Calgary, Mr. George Chahal, well, you better email him and say enough is enough. We are so sick and tired of your government's wasteful spending and higher taxes and ballooning debt.
Thank you, Franco, for joining us and bringing these, startling information for our listeners. Thank you.
Oh, Rishi, it's always my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on today.
Thank you. Have a nice day. ਫਰੈਂਕੋ ਟੈਰਾਜ਼ੈਨੋ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਸਾਂ ਜੀ ਕਿ ਸਾਡੇ ਦੇਸ਼ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਕ ਸਰਵੇ ਕਰਵਾਇਆ ਗਿਆ ਹੈ, ਲੈਜਰ ਪੋਲਿੰਗ ਸੀ ਇਹ। ਇਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ 54% ਕੈਨੇਡੀਅਨਸ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਫੈਡਰਲ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਆਪਣੇ ਖਰਚਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਟੌਤੀ ਕਰੇ, ਆਪਣੇ ਖਰਚੇ ਘਟਾਵੇ, ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਜੇਬਾਂ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਬੋਝ ਨਾ ਪਾਵੇ। ਕੈਪੀਟਲ ਗੇਨ ਟੈਕਸ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਲਿਆ ਗਿਆ ਹੈ, ਨਵਾਂ ਇੰਟਰੋਡਿਊਸ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ, 25 ਜੂਨ ਤੋਂ ਲਾਗੂ ਹੋਇਆ, ਉਸ ਨੂੰ ਵਾਪਸ ਲਿਆ ਜਾਵੇ। ਲੋਕ ਬੇਹੱਦ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਤੰਗ ਨੇ। ਅੱਜ ਹੀ ਇੱਕ ਗੱਲ ਚੱਲ ਰਹੀ ਸੀ ਜੀ, ਅਜੇ ਮੇਰੇ ਕੋਲ ਪੂਰੀ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਮੈਂ ਪੜ੍ਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਚੱਲ ਰਿਹਾ ਸੀ, ਕਿ ਇੱਕ ਵਿਅਕਤੀ ਪੈਸਾ ਇਨਵੈਸਟ ਕਰਦਾ, ਸਾਲ ਇਨਵੈਸਟ ਕਰਦਾ ਹੈ, ਕਈ ਸਾਲ ਲੱਗ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਨੇ, ਫਿਰ ਉਹ ਪੈਸੇ ਕਮਾਉਂਦਾ, ਟੈਕਸ ਪੇ ਕਰਦਾ, ਪ੍ਰੋਪਰਲੀ ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਝ ਪੇ ਕਰਨ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਆਪਣੀਆਂ ਬਚਤਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਇੱਕ ਨਵੀਂ ਪ੍ਰੋਪਰਟੀ ਖਰੀਦਦਾ ਹੈ, ਨਵਾਂ ਸ਼ੇਅਰ ਖਰੀਦਦਾ ਹੈ। ਹੁਣ ਜਦੋਂ ਉਸ ਦੀ ਕਮਾਈ ਖਾਣ ਦਾ ਮੌਕਾ ਆਇਆ ਤੇ 2-3 ਜਣੇ ਆ ਕੇ ਬੈਠ ਗਏ ਨੇ ਜੀ ਉਹਦੇ ਮੂਹਰੇ। ਇੱਕ ਤਾਂ ਬੈਠੀ ਹੈ ਸਾਡੀ ਫੈਡਰਲ ਸਰਕਾਰ, ਜੀ ਲਿਆਓ ਜੀ ਕੈਪੀਟਲ ਗੇਨ ਟੈਕਸ ਲਿਆਓ। ਵੀ ਕਾਹਦਾ ਕੈਪੀਟਲ ਗੇਨ ਟੈਕਸ? ਇਹਨੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਪੈਸੇ ਦੇ ਕੇ, ਟੈਕਸ ਦੇ ਕੇ, ਬਚਾਈ ਹੋਈ ਰਕਮ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਆਪਣਾ ਮਾਲ ਖਰੀਦਿਆ। ਹੁਣ ਜਦੋਂ ਸਮਾਂ ਖਾਣ ਦਾ ਆਇਆ, ਫਰੂਟ ਖਾਣ ਦਾ ਸਮਾਂ ਆਇਆ, ਤਾਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆ ਕੇ ਬਹਿ ਗਏ ਕਟੋਰਾ ਲੈ ਕੇ, ਕੱਢੋ ਜੀ। 67% ਤੁਸੀਂ ਲੈ ਜਾਣਾ। ਅਗਲੇ ਪਾਸੇ ਹੁਣ ਫਰੋਤੀ ਵਾਲੇ ਆ ਕੇ ਬਹਿ ਗਏ ਨੇ ਜੀ, ਉਹ ਬੰਦੂਕ ਕੱਢੀ ਬੈਠੇ ਆ ਜੀ, ਕੱਢੋ ਪੈਸੇ ਸਾਡੇ। ਵੀ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਕਾਹਦਾ ਹਿੱਸਾ? ਜਿਹੜੇ 4 ਪੈਸੇ ਕੋਈ ਕਮਾਉਂਦਾ ਹੈ, ਕੁਝ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਲੈ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਹੈ, ਕੁਝ ਫਰੋਤੀ ਮੰਗਣ ਵਾਲੇ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਜਾਣ ਲੱਗ ਪਏ ਨੇ। ਔਰ ਢਿੱਲ ਇੰਨੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਅੱਜ ਬੰਦਾ ਫੜਿਆ ਤੇ ਘੰਟੇ ਬਾਅਦ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਬੇਲ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਹੈ, ਉਹ ਫਿਰ ਤਿਆਰ ਹੈ ਚੱਕ ਕੇ ਡੰਡਾ। ਤਾਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਸਮੱਸਿਆਵਾਂ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਇਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਤੁਰੰਤ ਹੱਲ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ, ਧਿਆਨ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੈ, ਜਿਸ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਮੰਗ ਕੀਤੀ ਜਾ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ। ਅਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਅੱਜ ਦੀਆਂ ਰਿਪੋਰਟਾਂ ਆਈਆਂ ਨੇ, ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਫਰੈਂਕੋ ਨੇ ਦਿੱਤੀਆਂ ਨੇ, ਉਹ ਬੜੀਆਂ ਹੈਰਾਨ ਕਰਨ ਵਾਲੀਆਂ ਨੇ, ਪਰੇਸ਼ਾਨ ਕਰਨ ਵਾਲੀਆਂ ਨੇ। ਨਵੇਂ 2 ਟੈਕਸ ਆ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਉੱਤੇ, ਅਤੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਇਹ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਇਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੇ ਟੈਕਸ ਲਾ ਕੇ ਹੋਰ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਕਿੰਨਾ ਕੁ ਝਰੂੰਡਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ, ਇਸ ਤੋਂ ਲੋਕ ਕਾਫੀ ਖਫਾ, ਤੰਗ, ਪਰੇਸ਼ਾਨ ਵੀ ਨੇ। ਇਸ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੀ ਜੀ ਅੱਜ ਦਾ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਵੀ ਹੁਣ ਖਤਮ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ ਇਜਾਜ਼ਤ ਦਿਓ। ਆਪ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਬਹੁਤ ਧੰਨਵਾਦ।